Do you want to live in a world full of elves and fairies and other woodland sprites? Well, you can't. But your images can once you learn this magic, soft, glowing technique in Photoshop. Greetings and salutations, everybody, and welcome to Professional Photography Tips. My name is Josh Cripps, and you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Joshua Cripps Photography. Now, today on PPT, I'm going to show you guys a really cool technique to make a nice, soft glow to your images, to take them from something that looks like this to something that has a little bit more atmosphere and a little bit more magical feeling to it. Now, this technique is often referred to as the Orton effect. It was pioneered by a guy named Michael Orton a few years back. Totally rad dude who wanted to make his images look a little more painterly and a little more specifically watercolor-esque. And so he got this great idea to combine an overexposed, deliberately out of focus image as a double exposure with a sharply detailed, properly exposed image to create this cool watercolor effect. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to emulate that here in Photoshop today. So let me destroy all these layers. So long, suckers! And we'll start over from scratch. I'll show you exactly how to do this. It's a very simple technique, but it yields very, very cool results. So you've got an image looking something like this. This is a series of maples and pines that I photographed in Yosemite back in May of 2013. And what we want to do, the first thing, is take your image and duplicate the background layer. Now you can either do that via the layer menu, or you can use a keyboard shortcut Control or Command J. Make sure your background layer here is selected in your layers palette, then hit Control or Command J, and that will make you a new layer there. The next thing you want to do, like I said, the technique was overlaying a deliberately out of focus image with a sharp focused image. So we're going to go up here to Filter and Blur and Gaussian Blur. Now, the amount of blur you want to apply is going to vary depending on how much detail you've got in your image, the resolution of it, that sort of how much glow you want to apply. I usually find that somewhere between 20 and 50 pixels is a good radius. So we're going to go with 42.8 for this image. Click OK. Now go ahead and go down here and add a curves adjustment layer. And this is where you want to This is where the glow part of it comes in. You can crank this image, or crank your curves adjustment layer way up like this, and I like to add a little bit of contrast on there as well. That way it helps it to affect mostly just the highlights, giving it the glowing look. Okay, now you need to clip your curves adjustment layer to your blur layer. Let's go ahead and rename that blur. And we'll go ahead and, how you clip it, you can either right click on the layer and select create clipping mask, and that will draw this little arrow and clip it to your blur layer, or you can, let me undo that, you can hold the Alt or Option button and click right in between the two layers. You see how that little arrow and box jumps up, and that'll clip it. So that means that any adjustments we do to the blur layer, the curves layer will be affected the same. So now all we need to do is actually just reduce the opacity of the blur layer. Now I'm gonna deliberately do this more intensely than I normally would just to demonstrate the effect, but I recommend, as with everything, subtlety. So a good place for you guys to start is probably around 15% to 20% in the opacity. So I'm going to drag it down to around that level. And like I said, I think I'm going to overdo this one deliberately so you can see the effect. So I'm going to do 35% here on this glow layer. And you might have already forgotten, well, what did it look like before? Let me turn off that blur layer, and you could see how sharply and contrastily the details stand out. And then when I turn on that glow layer, it gives it this nice, soft, kind of ethereal effect. The other cool thing that this technique does is it helps soften really blown out highlights, and it increases color saturation. So there you have it, super simple. That's how you create this nice, soft magic Orton style glow in Photoshop. Now, this glow, I don't recommend using it on all images. It tends to work best with images that have very, very bright sections like these leaves that are getting lit up by the sun. It works really well with foliage, and it works really well with specular reflections. It doesn't work with every image, so I recommend just testing it out here and there, seeing what kind of effects you like. And I'm going to walk you through another couple of examples just to show a little bit more of how you can use this technique. So let me pop over to the next image here. This is a seascape that I shot in Davenport, California. Now you can see that there's some nice, beautiful specular reflections all over this wet rock, reflecting the super fiery sky. Now, maybe this image is just a little bit too saturated for my tastes these days. So I'm going to add a hue saturation layer, and I'm going to just drop the saturation a little bit. And then, maybe I want to add a little bit more contrast. Oops. Curves layer. There we go. All right, so just tiny little bit more contrast. Okay, so now you'll see, okay, I've got my background layer underneath these other layers. So if I do that Control-Command-J thing again, it's going to bring up my background underneath that stuff. That's not really what I want. I want to make sure that the layer that I'm blurring has all of the adjustments in place. So I somehow want this background copy to include the curves and hue saturation layer and to appear up on top of them. Now if I just drag it up like that, you can see that it's on top of the curves and hue saturation, so it's hiding those adjustments. So that's not going to work. Instead, what we're going to do is a technique called stamping visible. And the keyboard shortcut for that in Photoshop on a PC is Control-Shift-Alt-E as an elephant, or on a Mac, it's Command-Option-Shift-E, still as in elephant. So if you hit that, what it does is it creates a copy of everything that's visible in the image, and it places it right there on the top. So you can see if I turn that on and off, it's an exact duplicate of everything going on underneath it. Perfect. So now we can apply our blur, Gaussian blur, and let's drop the radius down a little bit on this one to 35. And this is something you just got to experiment with till you get a feel for what you like. I usually pick a radius that is just a little bit larger than the details that I kind of want to make glow, which in this case are those specular reflections in the rock. Go ahead and click OK. Next step again, add a very, very high contrast curves adjustment layer. And the brighter you make this, the more glow you'll get. I don't like to make it too bright though, because I don't want to start blowing out parts of my image. Again, I'm going to do Alt-Option, click and right in between the two layers to clip those two together. Now I'm going to drop my opacity down to about 20%. Okay, so I've got some nice glow going on. You can see here in the specular reflected areas, there is a little bit of cool glow, like the rock is emitting its own light. I like that. What I don't like is the way it's kind of wrapping around the sea stack and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a layer mask, holding Alt-Option and click on the layer mask to bring that up, pre-fill it with black, take my brush tool at 100% opacity, and then just paint in the glow in the areas where I really want it. On those specular reflections, here on the rocks, maybe a little bit in the sky to add a little bit softer glow and extra saturation up there to the sky. So now you can really easily just target that glow exactly where you want it. Cool. Looks pretty good to me. Now, as I mentioned, this technique tends to work best with photos that have a lot of foliage in them or a lot of high detail. It kind of gives it that soft painterly look. So here's one more image where I'm just going to demonstrate this technique, and you can see what kind of effect it has on the photo. So I'm not going to worry about any other adjustments. I'm just going to go back to the simple technique, Control-Command-J to duplicate that, filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and let's use about the same, a radius of 40, perfecto. Add a curves adjustment layer, crank up this curves adjustment layer so it's real high contrast. There we go. You can see how these yellows here in the tree are just starting to pop out like crazy. That means the glow is going to be really, really vibrant when we apply it. So holding Alt-Option, clicking between the two layers to clip that together, then I'm going to drop my opacity down to, again, about 15 to 20%. All right, now as I turn on and off my glow layer, you can see what a nice, soft glowing effect it creates to that foreground. It really does. Let me zoom in so you can see. What a cool kind of painterly softness and a little bit of an extra atmosphere it gives to the image. Now in this case, I don't like how it's brighten the sky up, so again, I'm just going to add a layer mask. This time grab my gradient tool, hitting G, as in G, I love the gradient tool, and then I'm going to click and drag from my foreground through to my sky, and that'll just hide that adjustment, that blurring, glowing, blurring up there in the sky, just applying it to the foreground. Now again, this is maybe a little bit stronger than I would normally apply it, but hey, you can do whatever you want on your own images. That's the technique. That's how you create an Orton style magical glow here in Photoshop. You can see it's a really cool technique, super simple, add a little bit of extra atmosphere and mysticalness to your photos. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with your friends and subscribe to this channel. You can also join my newsletter to get weekly photo tips and all kinds of cool photography stuff. In this video, we talked a little bit about layer masks. If you would like to learn a heck of a lot more about them, check out this video, which talks about 5 really cool things that you can do with layer masks. And if you want to get your Photoshop knowledge really up to speed, you can check out some of the full-length Photoshop workflow videos and tutorials that I've got on my website. Click right here, all kinds of fantastic Photoshop knowledge going on in there. So until next time, you guys have fun and happy shooting.